Sakamoto Days has no stakes. The main cast almost never faces any consequences, the main villains don't pose enough of a threat to the story to make me feel anxious, and even when the entire country of Japan is in peril, the issue is mitigated in the span of like 5 chapters and fails to capture the true scope and intensity of the problem. So, let's talk about it. Obviously, I'm exaggerating a little bit. There are in fact stakes, and from an objective standpoint, the story right now has the most at risk. The entire country of Japan is in danger ever since Uzuki essentially just legalized murder, which means around 124.5 million people are at risk. This is quite literally the biggest in scope the story has ever gotten, but there's a problem. I don't care. The civilians in the story have literally always been portrayed as these clueless NPCs that exist mostly just to take up space and make the world feel more lively. They see assassins throwing hands, launching cars, and punching each other into buildings and just don't care. And for me, I have no reason to care about the civilians outside of the basic reason of civilians dying equals bad. Obviously that's bad, but it's not compelling enough of a reason for me to be invested in the issue when I literally don't care for the civilians. They're literally too clueless and gag-like for me to have an emotional attachment to them. Moreover, the only 2 civilians that we know of that actually matter to the main cast are Hana and Aoi, who literally can't seem to be harmed. Suzuki had the potential to actually put some risk into the story when the Sakamoto store was blown up, but Sakamoto conveniently had a super secure hidden bunker that brought Aoi out of danger just in time for her to never be harmed. Meanwhile, Hana is just missing from the story. And this idea of never being harmed is the root cause of Sakamoto Days' stake issue. Essentially, the story has lost so much of its tension and excitement because I simply don't believe that the main characters can face failures. They might face minor setbacks, but they bounce back from it far too fast, and the setbacks are never impactful enough for me to care. Take Shin in the recent chapters. Shin has been running around mind-controlling entire groups of people and forcing them to shoot their 3 allotted bullets into the ground. Right before he does this for the first time, Asakura warns him that it could have a colossal burden on Shin's brain. Despite this, Shin tells him to crank the tower and the megaphone to max output so Shin's mind reading can reach the widest area, and then tells everyone to shoot their bullets into the ground. This works, and it's shown in the next chapter that Shin's nose is bleeding and that he's a little sweaty. Despite this, Shin gets up like it's nothing, runs onto the next radio tower, and does the same thing. Finally, Shin gets a great idea from Heisuke and decides to try and hijack the Sky Tower, but is stopped by Uzuki when he flies a fighter jet into the tower only to do literally 0 damage to Shin. Right after this, Shin tries to drop into the water below, but is stopped by Uzuki as he gets flung back into Sky Tower and gets to face down the barrel of Uzuki's gun, noting that he's exhausted and can't really move. Fortunately for Shin, plot is on his side, as this is exactly when Seba manages to hack every gun in Japan and disable them, effectively mitigating the fact that Uzuki legalized murder like 2 days ago. In the following chapter, Shin is completely fine with moving, as it's shown that Uzuki literally doesn't hit him 1 time, despite the fact that just in the previous chapter, Shin was apparently exhausted and could barely move. Not only does Shin not get hit once, he actually manages to drag Uzuki into a place where it's harder for him to fight, that is, until the Takamura personality comes out and makes Uzuki an actual threat. So what am I saying by recapping the last 3 chapters? I'm saying it feels like Shin is quite literally invincible, and I don't feel any tension seeing him fight Uzuki. For one, the colossal burden Asakura mentioned has done nothing to Shin. Sure, it's only been 3 chapters, and it's very possible that this burden might catch up to Shin later, but I'm not so confident. When Shin discovered his ability to make his brain process things way faster in his fight against Tenkyu, everyone thought that it would have a major drawback since it's such a busted ability. Instead, Shin walked out of that fight not even looking injured, despite him noting earlier that he could barely move his body. We know Shin doesn't regenerate like that, so Shin appearing so spotless after using such a crazy ability and going through a fight where he was literally getting his face palmed like a basketball is pure plot convenience. It feels like Suzuki has been gassing up Shin way too fast to the point where he's insanely strong and never faces illegitimate long-term consequence despite him consistently pushing his body and brain to the limit. Uzuki's supposed to be the big bad of the series and can't even injure an exhausted Shin after literally flying a fighter jet into a tower and then proceeding to run a 1v1 with him. And this issue of never facing consequences isn't limited to Shin either. Instead, it goes for almost the entire main cast. The closest we've seen to a legitimate long-term consequence for the main cast is Sakamoto's trauma after nearly losing his family, and even then his family wasn't even injured. Sakamoto might be traumatized, but I wouldn't put it past Suzuki to resolve this issue fairly quickly, give Sakamoto a power-up, and then have him rejoin the story. Heisuke had trauma after his fight with Kumanomi, but he got past that in his fight with Kamihate and has since rejoined the story without any major development to his character. No one ever gets seriously injured, massively develops, or anything of the sort. The only character that I would consider to be on the protagonist's side that has actually died is Hyo, and even then, he's literally the least developed Order member outside of Takamura, who is written to be that way, and Kamihate, who was introduced to the story after Hyo died. It feels like Suzuki has a fear of doing something actually drastic with his characters, and instead just decides to consistently play it safe, picking off characters that either don't matter or are on the side of the villains, and then writing all of the fights to never seriously affect the main characters. Another key part of Sakamoto Days lacking stakes is the power of the villains. Like I mentioned earlier, when your main villain is unable to even damage a character after flying a fucking jet into a building and then throwing hands with him, there's a problem. When the only way your main villain feels threatening is when he gets taken over by the strongest character in the series, there's a problem. When the only thing your main villain group does and is known for is take L's, there's a problem. The protagonists have lost Hyo. The villains have lost Club Jam, Carolina Reaper, Haruma, possibly Gaku, and possibly Tenkyu. The protagonists have gained Kashima, Yotsumura, Kendaka, Shishiba, Osaragi, and Kamihate. The villains have gained Oki, Torres, Tanabata, and Gozu. There is such an imbalance in the give and take between the protagonists and antagonists of the story that I legitimately don't feel worried for the main characters, despite the current arc being their greatest challenge by far. However, there is one time that I actually felt a bit of tension, and that's when Shishiba walked into his 1v3. This was quite literally the only time I felt real excitement in the story as of recent, and that's because Shishiba, alongside Osaragi and Kamihate, actually have the possibility of dying or getting seriously injured. Shishiba is an interesting character, he's got lots of great moments, and the fact that it doesn't feel like he's immune to consequences made his fight actually interesting. Had you thrown someone like Shin in his place, it would have gone completely different and changed the entire dynamic of the fight. He might be weaker than Shishiba, but I'd feel far more confident in his survival because he's one of the main characters and frequently uses his plot armor. Now, I'm not saying that the protagonists have to start dying left and right in order for me to feel excited. That would be a waste of characters. But what I am saying is that the protagonists, particularly Shin, need to start facing some long-term consequences that they have to actually persevere through in order to make the story more interesting. We need more of the Shishiba 1v3 and less of the Shin brain antics with no drawbacks. Otherwise, the story just feels like a rush of problems that gets solved too quickly and with too little drama to make me feel like they actually matter. All in all, Sakamoto Days, especially as of recently, feels like it's been lacking stakes. For a while now, the main cast hasn't really faced anything they don't recover from incredibly fast, and the villains continually lose until they feel more like a nuisance than a legitimate threat. This has come to its peak in the recent chapters, with Shin practically completely nullifying Izuki's plan, and then proceeding to scrap with the main villain of the series while exhausted and taking 0 damage. However, I do have hope that Suzuki will lock in and actually give the story some stakes. Until then though, check out this video on what I think are the 5 best weapons in Sakamoto Days.